Welcome back to the introduction to sustainable development, background and core ideas. In this presentation, I'd like to introduce you to where sustainable development, the concept and also the concept and the naming, the pronunciation and so on comes from, and where does it go to actually. What political backgrounds are within sustainable development and what international conventions actually also already took place that discussed sustainable development issues. This presentation will be in two parts. The first part will be about so-called the political development, and the second part will then be more about the conceptual ideas, bringing together the different disciplines of sustainable development, presenting you models of sustainable development, and also about different perspectives on sustainable development where you can work with. So we start with the part 1 out of 2, and with the more political development. What we overall start with is actually a short peer discussion. Peer discussion, of course, is hard now to do in a video taping, but either you sit together now in a small group in front of the screen, or you sit alone. In either way, you can think or discuss about what is your image of a good and valuable life. Is good, valuable life also what you understand by sustainable development? Just shortly take a break, press on the break button, and think about 5 minutes together or alone about what, in your point of view, is in your image a good and valuable life. So maybe you have thought now about this about 5 minutes. You may reflect this, and now listen also to the further ongoing presentation, and you can reflect what your understanding also was on a good and valuable life. We start with the etymology and the historical development of sustainable development. So why is sustainable development actually up to date? We've heard a lot about sustainable development. We hear to it every day in the news. We read about it in the newspapers, but very often actually the term of sustainability and sustainable development is often misused maybe. So we need to try to critically reflect actually how the wording and the term of sustainable development is being used in the news and also, for example, by politicians. For this, now in this presentation, we'll discuss it, what sustainable development really means. And so sustainable development is not only about long-term issues, but it's a more complex issue about sustainability. The etymology of sustainability. The roots go back actually to the Latin sustinere, meaning to sustain or to perpetuate. The first occurrence in the English language actually goes back to around 1290, where it was named 2 chiefs, each able to sustain a nation's fate. So that was where the term of sustainable development or sustainability firstly appeared in written language. In German language actually the word Nachhaltigkeit firstly appeared in 1713. So we can think in different languages also, and maybe you might also think about the Arabic terming when there it firstly appeared. So I said in German it firstly appeared in 1713, while Karl von Carlowitz, a person very active in forestry management, connected the word of sustainability the first time actually with forestry management, meaning that you may also only cut as much wood from the woods that can also regrow. So not cutting the whole wood, so the basic for also a further growing of the woods would be destroyed, but just in small pieces. So that was the first time in German language. And you might also think about when or discuss it, when and how the first time it appeared in Arabic language or in other languages, wherever you come from. The historical development then also in the 70s and 80s was that only in 1980 the term sustainable development was actually introduced in the UN Development Conservation Strategy. in 1972, Dennis Meadows and other scientists also published The Limits of Growth, which was commissioned by the famous Club of Rome. The Limits of Growth was a book, which you, front cover you can see also here in the slide, that's really brought up a huge and controversial discussion about how far we can go with economic development. Are there limits to growth also in economic, people's development, demographic growth, etc., etc. And this was the first time actually these aspects have been discussed. Dennis Meadows at that time was about the age of 30 years only when he brought up this book with Club of Rome, and he's today still active in giving speeches and discussing sustainable development and limits to growth. Of course, this book from 1972 had to be updated several times during the past decades, but still it is very actual because especially of the discussion that has been brought up at that time. In 1972 also, it was the time actually when the United Nations first came together in Stockholm for the Environmental Convention, and it was the first time when the United Nations also thought about, okay, how can we act together in a multiple way with different states together to protect our environment. In this summit actually in 1972, which took place in Stockholm, the first time so nations from all over the world came together to discuss common challenges in environmental protection and development. And also from Egypt, actually the representative of the highest representative of Africa was an Egyptian. It was Mustafa Kemal Tolba, who was also later on environmental minister in Egypt. And he represented Egypt and also African countries within Stockholm. And I had the pleasure actually also to talk with him in a personal interview in Cairo, which was really a great experience for me. How he thought and what stories he actually already also told. And thinking back actually, what he said was that the developing countries at that time coming together also in Stockholm, they very afraid actually that just developed countries wanted to stop economic growth actually also in developing countries by restricting them with environmental laws. This is a discussion actually that took place in 1972, and thinking now about the Rio Summit, Rio Plus 20 Summit, which took place just in 2012, we have had again quite similar discussions. So we need to think actually how far have we come during the past 30-40 years. But I think still we are progressing in sustainability discussions. However, in the aftermath of these publications I've talked about, the concept of sustainability was widened to include not only agriculture or forestry, but also to the whole ecosystem. Due to the international oil crisis, however, sustainable development experienced a major drawback. And this drawback also came by rethinking economic development or putting economic development again in the front line of discussions, which comes together with oil crisis or also a financial crisis. So still during the financial crisis we need to rethink or think about that maybe this is especially good time to think about sustainable development. In 1983, the World Commission on Environment and Development was set up and chaired by the Norwegian Prime Minister Gro Harlem Brundtland. This Norwegian Prime Minister, she chaired this commission, and this, the outcome of this commission's report was named Our Common Future. In this report, the today most prominent and most famous definition of sustainable development comes from. This definition says exactly sustainable development is a development that meets the needs of the present, so from us today, without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. So we today need to think about the opportunities and the needs of future generations and may not restrict future generations to meet their needs, interests, values and so on. So it is up in our responsibility today actually to it is up to our responsibility today to act responsibly for future generations as well. We need to think about our children, our grandchildren, and what opportunities we open or even close by our acting today. This is about sustainable development. The concept of needs, in particular the essential needs of the world's poor, to which overriding priority should be given, is very strongly inserted in this report and in this definition. The idea of limitations imposed by the state of technology and social organization on the environment's ability to meet present and future needs is also very strongly included. The Brundtland definition has therefore established a commonly accepted definition of sustainable development in literature, which, as I said, is still active and very popular in today's science and also public discussions. It was and is today still broadly discussed, and the report's publication also led to the unification of the three dimensions, which is the ecology pillar, the economic pillar, and the society pillar. And so to say, in the equality dimension, these three pillars may be respected when we think about sustainable development. So when we think about acting, for example, building a new house or planting new trees or establishing a new business, we may think about how our acting affects each of those three pillars. How does the building of a new house affect the ecology? How does it affect the economy? How does it affect society? The people live in, the surrounding environment of the building itself, the energy it generates or uses, and so on. So all those are aspects we might think about when we think sustainable about our acting. The definition forced therefore inter- and also intergenerational equity, as well as global awareness. Intergenerational and intragenerational awareness and equity means that we think within our generations of the present, and also intergenerational means also that we think also of future generations and build the equity of rights in our acting. Then, in '92, there was the Rio Earth Summit. This was actually the first summit that came up where the United Nations really aligned it to sustainable development issues. So not only on the environment, but really sustainable development. It was a summit with more than 100 state governments officials from more than 170 countries, exactly 178 countries. It politically established norms for global development. So it was up to think in a global way, and countries may think in a global way when it's not only to environmental aspects, but also social and economic aspects. And this summit brought together those different disciplines. The summit really promoted sustainable development globally, so it brought up a global presence of sustainable development, and led to a combination of ecology-oriented and development-oriented policies, because the development discussion very strongly came in here. As a result, more than 2,500 actually proposals for action really came up after this summit. Documents that were outcome that are most prominent today are the Rio Declaration for Environment and Development, the Agenda 21, and I'd like to focus especially on the Article 36, which is focusing on the educational aspects. In this article, it really says that education should be here for all, and we may include sustainable development into our educational activities for all generations and all over the world. Further on, there was also the Convention on Climate Preservation, the Convention on Protection of Species, also the Convention called on Biodiversity, and the Convention for the Protection of Forests. 10 years later, after Rio, in Johannesburg, 2002, in South Africa, states came together again. again more than 100 states and government officials, now that time from more than 190 countries, came together to discuss how is the state of sustainable development. And we have had more than 9,000 delegates coming together here. The UN Decade has been established in this summit. The UN Decade for Sustainable Development on Education for Sustainable Development that took place or takes place from 2005 to 2014. So this is just some outcomes here from this summit, which was globally not seen as successful as 92, definitely. States started to think more unilateral instead of multilateral, and so the interests of the states, of the nation states, dominated more than the global interest. Still, this UN Decade on Education for Sustainable Development could be initiated, which then started in 2005, and the Ubuntu Committee was established. This committee is actually the one that also established the idea of regional centers of expertise on education for sustainable development. RCEs, which is the abbreviation of this, started then in the development of 2005. 8 prior RCEs have been established, regional networks of actors, stakeholder actors that interact on sustainable development and ESD. And 8 of them started in 2005 globally. And today, in 2013, we already have more than 120 RCEs all over the world. So a very strong initiative that actually came out also from Johannesburg summit. Just recently now, in June 2012, we have had the Rio +20 summit. This again took place in Rio de Janeiro in Brazil. States again from all over the world came together. It was the largest summit in the world that ever took place. More than 50,000 people from all over the world came together. Those were not only people from nations representatives, so government representatives, but it were also people from NGOs, civil society, major groups that came together to bring in their interests on sustainable development. The Rio +20 summit has been structured quite open. It's included a very democratic discussion in advance to the summit, where together the Future We Want document, which is the final document of the Rio summit from 2012, was established and or prepared. Actually then during the summit, I took place there as a ministry representative of the Austrian Ministry of Science and Research. At the summit itself, it was in delegation meetings, it was discussed, this final document, cut down in some pieces, as again, unfortunate, very often the nation's interests dominated instead of the multilateral interests and global interests. And so lots of the critical goals and targets had to be cut down. But still, the final document is a document that leads the future, that gives a framework for the future on sustainable development and can provide us or is a guideline for representatives from either states, so everyone can take it, read out of it and see, okay, nations agreed, for example, that education for sustainable development should be included on all levels of schools and educational levels. All nations agreed on that topic. So we can go to our ministries and take this and say, okay, we can refer to this aspect, we'd like to implement it within our states. Lots of side events also took place, especially in higher education initiatives, also tertiary education or the UN Decade. The Future We Want, as I said, as the final document, has more than 250 paragraphs, articles, and articles from 229 to 234 are really touching on the aspects of education. In this article actually, we can really refer to, as I already said, go to our ministries and say, okay, that's the articles that our ministries, as the Egyptian, Austrian, German, every country in the world has agreed upon. And I highlighted here in the slide an article that especially points out the role of the youth in education for sustainable development. Another initiative at the Rio +20 summit was the People's Sustainability Treaty on Higher Education. This was actually really a people's initiative. It was not coming from the governments, but it's an initiative that the civil society and especially here the representatives of higher education initiated. In this treaty, 25 education agencies, organizations, associations and student groups really representing all over the world came together to write together treaties that have short-term, medium-term, long-term action goals. And any institution or organization signing these treaties actually is about to fulfill their actions that they are signing for. The treaties are focusing really on the transformation of sustainable development. Transformation therefore means not only to build up recycle bins within your classroom, but it really means a cultural change within your institutions. So signing the treaty not only means signing a document, but it really means that you need to take action for sustainable development within your institutions, and not only by putting around recycling bins, but also by really taking cultural change within your institution, raising awareness for sustainable development among all people within your institutions, having educational programs, having research programs, and changing really in the roots of the values also within your institutions towards sustainable development, taking sustainability within the primary principles of the institution. More than 100 institutions actually already signed this document, so we can really see a progress also in cultural change and the transformation for sustainable development in higher education. Here on the second slide and on the next one, I shortly summarized also some of the principles and of the action plan which you can go through, and you can also find a link then on the last slide where you can come directly to these treaties, which might also give you, even if you're not signing it at the first point, it might give you a guideline what actions can be taken within institutions for sustainability. This was actually the end of the first part, and in the second part then, maybe after a short break or discussions you take, we'll go into the concepts of sustainable development, looking into pillars and models of sustainability.